And so since it has been a couple weeks since the last one, thought we'd just make sure we understand what book we're in, right? We're in book of Romans, is that right? I hope so. All right. So Romans is really incredible because Paul lays out the Christian experience in a very clear way. And you could kind of say there are three main sections, all right? And that is, the first one is Romans 1 through 1:1 through 5:10a, all right? And that is justification. All right, it talks about condemnation, or being justified, or being reconciled. All that happens in the first 5 chapters. And then from 5:10b, so if you know that verse, it says in 5:10b, so 5:10a, it says, we've been reconciled to God through the death of his son. And then it says, much more we will be saved in his life. And so then from 5:10b through the end of chapter 8, I think it ends on 39 maybe, this is our salvation in life. And that is, we talk about sanctification, we talk about glorification, sonship, right? All of that has to do with being saved in life. And then from chapter 12 until the end, chapter 16, really is about our living. And specifically, I like to call it the body life or the church life. So we have this life. How do we live it out in a practical way? And chapter 12, it tells us, just as there are many members, and each member has, a different function, right? So it talks about us being members. Chapter 16 really shows us a picture of what the church life looks like. If you read it, it may seem like it's just a bunch of greetings. Greet this saint, but you see saints living house to house, enjoying being with one another. So the church life. But today, so then something interesting, chapters 9 through 11 do not fit in this kind of progressive experience. So you can kind of say, like, it's a parenthetical section. And this is chapters 9 through 11, which is what we're talking about today, which is selection. So that's kind of a structure of the book of Romans. And I've been trying to figure out, why did Paul write chapter 9 through 11? How does this fit in? And I have some own theories, but I don't have proof to too many of them, so I'm not going to share all of my ideas. But I think partially, one thing is, if you consider your experience, we just heard, right, 2 weeks ago about sonship. And you think, wow, this is amazing. How do I get to be a part of this? Isn't this wonderful? So we might ask the question, how did you become a Christian? Who brought you to the Lord? And I was just considering my salvation experience, which, on the one hand, when I got saved, seemingly, I was the one, right? I remember I was lying in my bed late at night. I was a sophomore in college, and lying there and thinking, I'm just empty, and I need the Lord. And so I called out, and I got saved. And so seemingly that was, right? That was me. And then about 6 months later or so, I was on a Christian retreat. And one night I just began to consider what brought me to the Lord. And I just looked back and I just realized, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. But I had grandparents on my dad's side who would occasionally share a little bit with me, although I was not interested, but they still shared it. I had an aunt that her and her two sons, my cousins, we were really close. And I was there like at least once a month for a weekend, and they always would go to church. So I would go, even though I did not care for it, but I still was under some sort of speaking. And there was something in me that was somewhat open. But as I went through high school, I just became very bitter. Just some personal experiences where I just decided I did not care for God and no interest in God. In fact, I kind of opposed him. And when I became when I got into college, I was in the dorms and I just ran into someone I met, and he was a believer, seemingly by chance, right? And he wasn't really that seeking at the time. He had just gotten saved like a few months ago, and we became close friends. But that whole freshman year, I was just living my own life, right? No interest in God. And then over the summer, then the next fall, he comes back and he is crazy. He's a crazy lover of Jesus all of a sudden. And I'm like, what are you? So he would speak to me. He would share the gospel with me. He would share about the Lord. And every time for months and months, I would just argue. I would make fun of him, right? But then there were just some times I ran into someone. I was sitting at lunch and just some believers walked up and shared the gospel with me. And on the one hand, I was somewhat offended, but on the other hand, I was troubled. There was something troubling me. And it seemed like as I got closer to this date, May 6th, when I got saved, it was like people just there were multiple times people sharing the gospel with me. This person. And eventually what I realized was I didn't choose the Lord. The Lord chose me. And I just want to encourage you all. This is the most crucial point as a believer. Do you know that the Lord chose you? It says in this first point, this is John 15:16. The Lord is speaking to the disciples, and he says, "You did not choose me. I chose you." And how are the disciples? I say, hold on, Lord. Wait a second. Don't you remember back in John 6? You were talking a bunch about eating the flesh, drinking your blood, and all the disciples. The Lord had many disciples. I don't know if you realize that. But the Lord had many disciples. And in John 6:66, it says, many of the disciples, let me see here, they went back. This is not on here, but this is, I wrote it down for myself. Many of his disciples went back to what they left behind and no longer walked with him. So there wasn't just 12, there were many. But then the 12 remained. And then he asked them, are you going to leave? Right? And they said, no, you have words of eternal life. And then he said again there, he said, what did he say? He said, was it not I who chose you, the 12? Right? Isn't that something? On the one hand, the disciples, we chose you. But the Lord said, but I chose you. So on the one hand, yes, if you look at it from our angle, we chose the Lord, right? We opened to the Lord. But actually, the Lord chose us. And, just in case there's anybody here that really loves the doctrinal idea, the ideologies and all understanding, we're not going to get into this predestination, free will, like which is which. This is although it's a Bible study, I think it's more of like a life study. Like we care about applying this to our Christian life, not just understanding some like a toy, like we're trying to, figure out all the little things. So on the one hand, yes, we chose the Lord. On the other hand, we were predestinated before the world began. And so this is in Romans 8:30. It's on your outline here. It says, and those whom he predestinated, these he also called. And those who he called, these he also justified. And those who he justified, these he also glorified. So, if you could say it this way. There was a famous preacher, D.L. Moody. He said, if you were to go to the gate of heaven, you would see a sign that says, whosoever chooses. And then you walk through that gate, you look behind you, and it says predestinated before the world began. All right, it's mysterious. But this is the reality. On the one hand, we choose the Lord. On the other hand, the Lord chose us. So that's the important thing. When we talk about selection, we have to be clear that God chose us. If you are saved, if you believed in him, guess what? You were chosen, right? This is what the word tells us. It tells us in even Ephesians 1:4, even as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world. So going on, what I really want to focus on is kind of two things. One is, why did the Lord choose you? Why did he choose me? What criteria does he use to choose people? How does he decide who he chooses and who he doesn't? You ever asked that question before? Why? How does he come to such a decision? All right, that's the first question. And the second one is, once we understand that, which I'll tell you, we're going to answer that question, and you might be disappointed by the answer, just to be honest. But once we understand that, what should our response be? So that's how we're going to end, is we're going to talk about how do we respond to this matter. So in order to do this, I think it's important to read the Bible. The Bible is what we base all of our understanding on. And so if you have a Bible, you're welcome to go to Romans 9, but I'm just going to read a number of verses, because I think to really grasp it, we need to read quite a bit. So we're going to read from Romans 9:6 through 9:21. And so here's what it says. But it is not as though the word of God has fallen away, for not all who are out of Israel are Israel. Neither is it that because they are the seed of Abraham, they are all children, but in Isaac shall your seed be called. That is, it is not the children of the flesh who are the children of God, but the children of the promise who are accounted as the seed. For this is the word of promise. At this time next year, I will come and Sarah shall have a son. Right? So just for a moment there, right? What he's saying here is, just because you were born of an Israelite does not mean you were selected by God. Because even with Abraham, it wasn't all of Abraham's seed that God chose, right? Because God, when Abraham heard that God promised a seed, he said, okay, well, Sarah can't have a baby, so I'm going to go to Hagar, my concubine, and have Ishmael. But God did not want Ishmael. He wanted Isaac, the seed of promise, right? So that's, right? So then Sarah had Isaac. Isaac married Rebekah. And it says, and so this is verse 10, and not only so, but Rebekah also, having conceived by one, Isaac our father. And this is a crucial verse right here. This is a big one. Though the children, Rebekah's children, had not yet been born, nor had done anything good or bad, that the purpose of God according to selection might remain, not of works, but of him who calls. It was said to her, the greater shall serve the less. As it is written, all right, you ready for this? Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. All right? So here, on the one hand, right, it was supposed to be Abraham's seed, Isaac. His seed would be blessed. But then when the time came, there were two, the twins, Jacob and Esau, and God only chose one. And what was the criteria that he used? What does it say? Though they had not yet been born, nor had done anything good or bad. All right? And now you may say, okay, why would God select Jacob over Esau? It must have been because he knew Jacob would be good and Esau would be bad. Right? Do you think that's it? Well, if you read the book of Genesis, you would know that Jacob was a naughty boy. He tricked Esau into getting the birthright. He tricked his father into getting the blessing. He tricked his uncle into getting a better flock. And he even wrestled with God. What is this? You know, Esau, when he finally met up with Esau seemed like a good guy. He had a good family. He was really nice to Jacob. Jacob was all worried that Esau was going to beat him up and kill him because he had tricked him. But Esau was just, so what is this? Right? Okay. So let's keep going. It says, what then shall we say? Is there unrighteousness with God? Absolutely not. For to Moses he says, I will have mercy on whomever I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whomever I will have compassion. So then, it is not of him who runs, or him who wills, nor of him who runs, but of God who shows mercy. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, for this very thing I have raised you up, that I might show in you my power, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. So then, he, that is God, has mercy on whom he wills, and he hardens who he wills. You will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who withstands his will? And then this is a key verse again. But rather, O man, who are you to answer back to God? Right? So here on one hand, this person say, how is this fair? How does God, what right does God have to say he can choose one person over another person? Is this fair? And Paul, he doesn't say, yes, it's fair. He says, what? Oh man, who are you to answer back to God? And it says, shall the thing molded say to him who molded it, why did you make me thus? Or does not the potter have authority over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel unto honor and another unto dishonor? So this is a lot, right? But the point here is, what is the basis of God's selection? And you know what it is? God did. God chose. That's the answer, right? He chose Jacob and he didn't choose Esau. And it was before they had done good or bad. Huh? Before the foundation of the world, he chose you. Even though he knew how terrible you were, how many mistakes you would make, but he chose you, right? And the key is he did this so that it would not be according to man's work. There is nothing we can do to change God's mind on this matter, right? And at a certain point, right, he chose you before the foundation of the world. At a certain point in your life, God called you. Right? Apparently, it was us that opened to the Lord. Actually, I bet if you look back, you will realize when we talked about all things, right? We're talking about all things, right? Your parents, the school you went to, the people you sat next to in class, the person you ran into walking on the quad, right? All this is God's arrangement because he was calling you. Why? Because he chose you. So, this is, right? I don't know, is this the answer we would have expected? Wouldn't we like to know, is there something we could do or not do? But actually, we just realized God chose us. And I just, a brief word, we don't want to get too much into our mind about this. And like, as we're going out on the gospel, like, oh, did God choose that person? Should I preach the gospel to them? If God didn't choose them, I don't want to preach the gospel to them and they get saved on accident. That's not going to happen, right? We follow the Lord, right? Who we sit next to, that might just be the Lord placed you there. And if you don't do it, someone else is going to. But wouldn't you like to be the person responsible, right? That the Lord helped bring someone else, right? You help bring someone to the Lord, right? So anyway, with knowing this, how do we respond to such a word? Who am I that God chose me? And I didn't do anything for it. Why did he? You know what he did? He had mercy. He had mercy on me. I did not deserve or earn God's choosing. I don't deserve salvation. I did not earn salvation. There was nothing. You may say, oh, maybe the Lord knew my heart would be open to the Lord. Even my heart being open was God's choosing. I mean, it is the Lord's mercy that we are here. Right? Isn't this wonderful? So it says in Romans 9:15, so repeat this, for to Moses he says, I will have mercy on whomever I will have mercy. And guess what? That whomever is us. Isn't that wonderful? We've received the Lord's mercy. On the one hand, we know that God loved us, right? We know he loves us, and he loved us before the foundation of the world. But we're sinners. We have, if you want to love someone, they need to be at least somewhat equal to you in a certain regard, right? God loved us, but he had no way to reach us. So he had mercy. And that mercy reaches even further than his grace. Right? He had mercy on us. Even when we were in the most pitiful condition, we had nothing good to offer to God, yet he had mercy on us. So, if you look at, willing, right, to will, that's like man's inward determination, right? Trying to do something. In our running, that's kind of our outward striving. None of these things, right, will change, will impact, our being chosen by God. And so, on the one hand, we should appreciate the Lord for his mercy, for choosing us and calling us. But actually, once you realize that, you'll realize the Lord's mercy in everything in your life. The more longer you're alive, the more you realize how much you need the Lord's mercy. We talk about all things working together for good. We should be thankful to the Lord for, I could have gone to a different school. I could have, I remember after I graduated, I had several options. I could have gone to work at this place. I could have, gone back to school, but I decided to go over to another country, and I met some believers there, and it changed my life. And I don't know how I ended up there. I still don't understand what was going in my head. People were like, Brady, what are you doing going there? I went to Ireland. I didn't have a job. I didn't have plans. I just had to go. I got a visa and I was like, I don't know where I'm going to live. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going over there. People thought it was crazy. I thought it was crazy. But you know what? That was the Lord operating. And it was his mercy. It was a mercy that a couple things I did didn't end up, I wasn't, that I survived, you know. It's the Lord's mercy, but it's also the Lord's mercy that I gained him and experienced him. And even in our failures, you know, sometimes there's been times when I've been serving and I just had a failure. Like I remember one time I was caring for some young people. They were high schoolers. And I went to one to watch this swim meet. And then there was another one that wanted to play basketball. And I was there for the one that was at the swim meet. And I was supposed to watch him. But basketball is fun. So I went off and I played basketball. And I missed his race. And he was disappointed. His mom was disappointed. Because she's like, you know, she felt like I was, you know, caring for one person over another. And I just felt like such a failure. I thought, Lord, I'm terrible. I'm so selfish. But you know what? I'm thankful for that failure because I realized how much I need the Lord's mercy. You know, like on the spring break trip, right? Did you all, we talked about failure, right? And talked about God's need and God's goal and how actually failure is good because it causes us to see we need God, right? Of course, we're not going to seek out failing. Right? We don't intentionally put ourselves in failure situations, but we shouldn't be discouraged when we do fail because the Lord's mercy is with us. So with that, how about we can read the focus together and then we'll have some time for our group time. So our concept, and we can read this together. Yeah. Our concept is that one who wills will get what he wills to get, and that the one who runs will gain what he runs after. If this were the case, then God's collection would be according to our effort and labor. But it is not so. Hold on, let's repeat that line again and let's shout it. But it is not so. It is altogether of God who shows mercy. We do not need to will or to run, for God has mercy on us. If we know God's mercy, we will not put our trust in our efforts. Neither will we be disappointed by our failure. The hope for our wretched condition is God's mercy.